I am pleased to introduce Mr. Norman Bristol Colon. Mr. Colon is working with the governor as part of the 2020 census. He is the founder and chairman of Pennsylvania Latino Convention, and he is also the executive director of the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. But he's going to introduce himself in the role that he has in helping Pennsylvania get ready for the 2020 census. We've got a lot to cover in a short period of time, so if you could hold your questions until the end. So please make sure that you're using the pads and pens and capturing those questions as they come up for you, and we'll make sure that we manage our time effectively. Mr. Colon. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about census. As you know, it was previously mentioned, I am Norman Bristol Colon, the Executive Director of the Governor's Census 2020 Complete Count Commission. And just a little bit about myself, I was born in Puerto Rico, moved to Pennsylvania to go to Penn State, and we are winning the game by 6 points. So hopefully by the time I'm done, we can say that we won the game. No, not like last week, that I was in Europe, and when they called me and told me about the game, and I was so devastated. The good thing is that I was in Dublin, and the Irish people are really happy. So I was with the right people at the right time. So I have been with the census for the past 8 months, and for us in the Commonwealth, it's going to be 2020 are going to be 2 top priorities for us in the Commonwealth. The first half is going to be Census 2020, making sure that we are counting everyone, every single individual in the Commonwealth, including refugees, immigrants, undocumented immigrants, everyone. And then the second half, you already know, is the presidential election. So 2020 is going to be a very important year on how we are going to be drafting not only the agenda of Pennsylvania, but also the agenda of the nation. So counting everyone in Pennsylvania plays a major role because, as you all remember, there was a question about citizenship in the census. And we won that question in the courts. So it's no longer part of the Census 2020. But there was something behind that question. And it was all about fear-mongering, and making sure that those that live in the United States today were denied the fact that we are a nation of immigrants, that we are a very diverse nation, and that in Pennsylvania we are more diverse than ever before. So I want to connect the census message and the presentation today to the realities that we have in the Commonwealth. So in making the case, you all know that this is mandated by the U.S. Constitution, that the census is right there in the Constitution, and we want to be in full compliance. There are some individuals that do not believe in the Constitution. We do in PA. So we want to be in full compliance with the Constitution. It only happens every 10 years. It is important that, in Pennsylvania we have elections every 6 months, primaries election. The census is only every 10 years. And I believe, as a person that really treasures the American democracy, if there are 2 things that we as Americans should be very proud of participating in, is voting and counting in the census. It is the largest peace mobilization effort in the United States. Many months ago, you heard about the drafting our young men and women to go into war. That was a mobilization effort. Well, this is a real mobilization effort, but it's during peacetime, and it's all about knowing who is here in our nation, who are our neighbors, and the demographics of the United States. As I mentioned before, we must count everyone, everywhere, from rural, suburban, urban areas in the Commonwealth. The census is safe, private, and confidential. So anybody, asking or with any fear, please know that anyone that tamper with the census will be penalized with $250,000 or more, and some prison time. And then the census, in making the case for the Commonwealth, is about federal funding, and I want to get into it, political representation, resources, for businesses. It is about smart business decisions. And of course, after 2020, 2021, 2022, you're going to be working on redistricting and making sure that we have fair districts in the Commonwealth. So the numbers that we submit to the President of the United States by December 31st of 2020 are the numbers that you are going to be using for redistricting, moving on. As I mentioned, in supporting the case, the Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution mandates that we do the census, and by law, the U.S. Census Bureau must deliver a report to the President of the United States no later than December 31st of 2020. Once again, in explaining the case about census, we conduct redistricting at the federal, state, and local levels. This is not only about the 435 members of Congress. You all know that it's also about legislative district in Pennsylvania. We're going to be using those numbers for that, but also at the local level. We have over 2,500 cities and townships in PA that they use the data to make sure that we are a government that is representative of the people. The apportionment of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, once again, if Puerto Rico will be the 51st state, the island will have 2 U.S. senators, just like anybody else. So that is not used, the Senate is not used the numbers from the census. Now the House does, because it's clear that 435 members, that's it. Even if we continue to increase, if Puerto Rico becomes the 51st state of the Union, they have to be in the 435 members. So some states will be losing a congressional seat because of Puerto Rico joining, and that's why the fight is so fierce, that not allowing the island to be a part of it. But it's also a fight here in Pennsylvania, because if we don't continue to grow in population, we are scheduled to lose 1 congressional seat. And that's why we are putting all our energy to make sure that we are counting everyone. And we already know that North Carolina, if we lose 1 seat, that seat is going to North Carolina. And for us, the nation was founded here in our Commonwealth. So we need to make sure that we still have the political power and influence in Washington in everything that has to do with the United States of America. It is also about funding. $675 billion that the federal government distributes every year depends on census data. And this is not handout. This is not money that the federal government, they feel happy about it and they are sending money to the states. This is money that Pennsylvania taxpayers and taxpayers all across the nation, they pay, and we just want it back. And the only way that we can get some of that money back is by the census data and the numbers that are provided to the President of the United States. Provide statistical support for grant applications. Many of us, and especially like research-based university like Penn State, they use the data, they get a lot of the funding based on the numbers from the census. And then it is about planning for the future needs, where the new hospital should be open or the new elementary schools. So all those decisions are made based on census data. The goal for the governor and the goal for all of us is to make sure that we are counting everyone in the Commonwealth. Once again, as I mentioned before, we are more diverse than ever before, and I want to get into the hard-to-count populations, that many of you live near those populations on how to make sure that we are counting everyone. The governor established the Census 2020 Complete Count Commission in September 2018. I joined in February of this year, and we have about 45 members that are working diligently in making sure that we have every Pennsylvania community represented and that we are counting everyone. In addition, every single agency under the governor's jurisdiction, they have a plan to make sure that we are counting everyone. For example, the Department of Aging. We know that through the Department of Aging, we support and we provide services to over 3 million senior citizens in Pennsylvania. And we also know that by 2030, that number is going to be almost 4 million senior citizens in Pennsylvania. So we need to make sure that we are counting everyone, because if we lose 1% of the senior population in Pennsylvania, that translates in more than $220 million that we are not going to get. So we need to make sure that we are counting everyone. Through the Department of Human Services, we know that they serve over 3 million Pennsylvanians, vulnerable communities. So we need to make sure that through them we are counting those that we provide services. This is extremely important, especially if you are going to be working with communities across the state, that you know this. The census right now, you should not have anyone in your communities representing the census, unless they are what we call partnership coordinators. Those are the only ones. And I say this because when you get anyone from the U.S. Census in your communities, we are going to report that to all the Pennsylvania Chief of Police, so they know that to expect census individuals in your communities. And if you see anyone, and especially in this time and age, unfortunately, there are some people that are going to be targeting our senior citizens. So we have to start an educational campaign so scammers do not abuse people of Pennsylvania representing census when in reality they are not. And that's why it's important that you know that from now until January, census workers should not be knocking on doors. We are doing everything in the high level, educating and making sure that we are doing it through the churches, through the schools, but no one should be knocking on doors. Between February and July is when we will have what we call group quarters, and the U.S. Census Bureau is going to be counting senior citizen homes, college students. And especially if you have universities and colleges, please know that those kids on Census Day, they must be counted in Pennsylvania. Even if their parents live in California or Texas, if they are on Census Day in Pennsylvania, they are counted here. And then Census Day is April 1st, 2020. However, this is the first digital census in U.S. history. You can still fill out the form by paper, by phone, or by internet, which means that in the early March, you're going to get a form asking you to fill out the census form online, and then you can request if you want to do it by phone or by paper. But you don't have to wait until Census Day, April 1st. As soon as you get that form, you can fill out the census form and send it back to the federal government. And between March and July of 2020 is when we are going to be expecting the self-response via the internet, paper, or phone. And then between March and April, we are going to be doing a lot of awareness and education, making sure that we are reminding individuals. We know that there are some individuals in our own community that they have 2 or 3 jobs, that the top priority for them is to provide for their families, not to fill out the census. But we have to connect the message of why that is so important. And then between April and July of 2020 is when you are going to see enumerators in your communities. Making sure that if we didn't get the response back, those individuals are going to be knocking on doors so they can get the information that we need for a complete and accurate count. And that is happening all across the nation, not only in Pennsylvania. Once again, between now and December is going to be the education phase, at least for us in the state government, because remember that we are partners to the federal government, but we are not responsible for the official count. That is only the responsibility of the federal government. But we are responsible for the education phase between now and December, going everywhere to every single community in our Commonwealth, the awareness phase between January and February, motivating phase March and April, making sure that people know why this is important, and then the reminder phase between May and July. By July, the complete count should be ready, and the report should be, in the works, so it can be delivered to the President of the United States by December 31st of 2020. The state government is working with the U.S. Census Bureau, local and county governments, hard-to-count communities, civic organizations, churches, the pastors, because we believe that at the local level, those are the trusted voices. Those are the best ambassadors that we have when it comes to Census 2020. The work that we are doing at the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, we are following the map of the regional offices that we have, and that is how our commissioners inside the governor's Census 2020 Complete Count Commission are doing some targeting and delivering the message in those communities. Why we are doing that? Because in 2010, we had 19 offices in Pennsylvania by the U.S. Census Bureau. Today, we only have 9. So we have to do more with less. And that's how the state government has to step up and do some work on census to make sure that whatever the federal government is not providing, that we are assisting and providing that assistance to our local communities. Now, the anatomy of a census. And it is important to know that we are in this together, that this is very important to every single Pennsylvanian. It is about rural, urban, suburban Pennsylvania. It is about funding, political representation, resources, smart business decisions, and redistricting. Now, when we look on the hard-to-count populations, and those are the populations that we believe, based on census data, that we are going to have a really hard time counting. These are the hard-to-count populations: young children, racial and ethnic minorities, and as you all know, Pennsylvania is more diverse than ever before. We have 1.5 million African Americans, we have 1 million Latinos, we have 500,000 Asian and Pacific Islanders, we have 500,000 individuals that identify themselves as LGBTQ members. So it is important that we target those communities to make sure that we are counting everyone. Persons who do not speak fluent English, and that's why not only at the federal level, they are providing a lot of the flyers and brochures in about 15 to 19 different languages, but in Pennsylvania, we are also doing the same, following what the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation has been doing. So we are looking at the languages that are most spoken in Pennsylvania, so we deliver the message to those local communities. The poor, once again, that is extremely important that we are targeting the poor communities. The homeless, and that's why we are partnering with the food banks and churches to make sure that when time comes, we are ready to count the homeless in Pennsylvania. Undocumented immigrants, legal residents, and refugees. I am from Lancaster City, and Lancaster is the refugee capital of the United States. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we are counting the refugees in Lancaster. Mobile individuals, once again, such as college students, LGBTQ individuals, and individuals that unfortunately, especially now and today, they are angry at our government. And some of them are going to be like, we don't want to deal with the federal government, I don't want to be counted. So we need to make the case for them and explain why that is so important. And then children under the age of 4 comprise the most undercounted population. So we need to make sure that we are counting every single child in Pennsylvania. For many reasons, maybe one weekend the young kid is with mom, the other weekend is with dad, they live with grandparents, and that's why that is the most missed population in Pennsylvania and all across the nation. Now, census is about $27 billion a year that we get in Pennsylvania. That is, per individual, we get $2,093 per person. That contribution in the next 10 years of that individual, one single individual, to the Commonwealth is $20,930 per individual decennially. And this is very important because whatever number we provide in 2020 to Washington, that is the number that we are going to be judged for the next 10 years. This is not like the presidential election of 2000. We cannot do a recount and submit the numbers again. Whatever we submit is the official number, and that is the number that Pennsylvania is going to be judged for the next 10 years between 2020 and 2030. All residents, independently if they are young, old, urban, suburban, rural, citizen, resident, immigrants, they all will contribute the same amount of money to the Commonwealth if they are counted, the $2,093, which yearly Once again, it's $27 billion for the Commonwealth, and in the next 10 years, it's over $270 billion that comes back to Pennsylvania. And that is money that goes to critical infrastructure. You know, the roads and bridges, Medicare, education, senior citizen programs, human services support, and rural development. It is for fair political representation. You know, today Pennsylvania has half of the representative it did from 1913 to 1933. So we have 18 members of Congress. Back in 1913 to 1933, we have about 36 of them. And if we are scheduled to lose one seat, that means that number is going down to 17. So if you are doing some work with members of Congress, please remind them that if we don't do a complete and accurate count, one of them is going to be losing his or her job, because that is, you know, that's part of the apportionment. So, and despite a modest increase in population from 2000 to 2010, you all know that we lost a seat in 2010, and we are on track to lose another one in 2020, and that's why we are working so hard to make sure that we are counting everyone. It is about housing and infrastructure, better quality of life. If you work in county and city governments and township government, we, based on census data, for example, in fiscal year 2016, we receive over 196 million in CDBG funds that go, you know, to many townships and cities. If we provide them a grant through CDBG money, that can possibly be the largest grant that township or city receive that year, and maybe historically. It is also about safety. You know, Pennsylvania is big. This is a large state. So we need to make sure that we provide our residents with safety. And in fiscal year 2017, thanks to census data, Pennsylvania received more than $1.6 billion in funding, you know, that was authorized by the 2015 Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. So depending on the year, and depending on what are the priorities in Washington, they use the census data to provide funding back to us. And you and I know that in the year 2026, 2027, we're going to be 250 years old as a nation. So we are getting old. And the infrastructure, whoever becomes president of the United States next year will possibly have the biggest infrastructure investment of dollars for roads and bridges and our national infrastructure. And those investments are coming back to the state depending on the data that we provide through census. So it is important to keep that in mind. It is also about dignity. You know, we have, as I mentioned before, one of the largest senior citizen communities and populations in the nation. And through census, in fiscal year 2016, census data directed more than 31 million for nutrition services to the state for senior citizens that otherwise would not have food in their homes. So that's important as well. It is for rural communities as well. You know, Pennsylvania, 35% of Pennsylvania is rural. And we, through the census and those numbers, we receive about $760 million that went to rural electrification loans and loan guarantees, water and waste disposal system for rural communities, rural rental assistance payment, business and industry loans for rural Pennsylvanians, and then cooperative extension services that receive more than $17 million based on census data. Census matters to the cities. You know, it is important to the cities because an accurate census helps ensure fair representation at all levels of government. The primary constitutional purpose of the decennial census is to determine how many congressional representatives each state will have. So I would like to know where is going to be my representative in Congress. You know, who's going to be? Is it going to be, one or two? How are they going to be dividing the district? And then the census directly impacts the funding your city will receive over the next decade. It also matters to government. In state government, everything that we do, decisions that we make, the planning that goes behind the scenes, from the governor to the cabinet members to the legislature, everything that we do, we use census data to make sure that we are providing Pennsylvanians with the best services possible. We need to know what is the demographic composition of communities and constituents all across the state. For education planning, if there is a need, once again, to open a school, procurement and provision of services. So for state government, everything that we do is related to census and census data. It is important to other community stakeholders. For example, universities and medical facilities that use census to make sure that they know how they are going to be drafting their strategic plans, where the next university is going to open. Or, for example, Penn State, they have over 160 bachelor's degree. Based on census data, are they really providing the bachelors for the workforce of the future, or they are not? So those are the numbers and the data that they use to make some of those decisions, to design educational curricula. And then, of course, statistics and metrics used in journalism and news reporting that today we need it more than ever. So we can really hold the journalists accountable so they deliver the truth. They deliver the clear message. And when we do responsible data and the responsible data collection, numbers don't lie. They are real numbers. And then for businesses, you all remember that Amazon created this buzz about going somewhere and that they were going to invest $1 to $2 billion in a new headquarters. Well, we provided them with all this data. At the end, they didn't open the headquarters in PA or in New York or in New Jersey, but I assure you that whatever decisions Amazon executives are making, they are using that data. And they know, where the next market is going to be. And the Amazons of today, you all know that is possibly one of the biggest billionaires in the world. And that's why for business it's so important. In Lancaster, if you go to my own city, you know that the city goes through an amazing renaissance. It's a beautiful city. But in the outskirts of the city, you are seeing a lot of new retails and Targets opening. They know that we have over 525,000 people in Lancaster County, and the projections look like it is going to continue to increase, and that's why they are getting ready for this increase in population. And in addition to that, based on those numbers, we know that in Lancaster we get about 10 million tourists a year. So opening those retail outlets and logistical facilities is important, and that's why they use the census data. An undercount will be too costly to Pennsylvania. As I mentioned, it will be, if we do 1%, just 1% undercount, that will cost the state $221 million a year. That means that we in state government, we need to find the $221 million that we are not providing to our citizens somewhere, whether it's taxes, new ways of conducting government, the philanthropic work, the foundations, they will have to step in and provide services to the most vulnerable communities. So it will be too costly to have an undercount in Pennsylvania. And especially because, as I mentioned before, we can only do the census once, and for the next 10 years, that is the number. We would like to really have a fair share of the budget in our nation. How can you help about census and making sure that we are in this together? You can be in public meetings, conducting events and presentations, and we can provide you with the toolkit, with the talking points, with the information that you need to make the case of why census is so important. You can write op-eds and articles to your local newspaper, conversation with colleagues, neighbors, family, and friends. Pennsylvania is a very caring state. So when you talk to your neighbors, this is a conversation that you can have. For example, on the Monday before Thanksgiving, The second First Lady of Pennsylvania and I, we are going to be on WITF talking about census. The idea is that because it's the Monday before Thanksgiving, that at least there are going to be some family conversations on the table when they are breaking bread on Thanksgiving, and census will be part of the conversation across the Commonwealth. Social media posts and video, those are very influential and effective, especially with the young populations in Pennsylvania. In the workplace, in schools, in your churches, in community centers, talk about census and the importance of why this is so connected to Pennsylvania's future. You can also take some action on how we can do the census better. Identifying a census hub. Let's say that you are the executive director of a nonprofit organization. If you can provide a computer for individuals without internet or without computer, that they can go to your center and fill out the census form there, that is a huge help. And that's why we are partnering with the National Library Association, with the Pennsylvania Library Association, with all the colleges and universities in the state to make sure, especially in places where we know that broadband is not there in rural Pennsylvania, that at least in the 14 public universities that we have and the colleges and universities, that individuals can go there and fill out the census form. Create I Count Your Town, and the name of your town, I Count Lancaster, as part of the social media group, so people know that the census is extremely important. And then become a census champion. In becoming a census champion is, we, in the governor's office and through the Governor's Census 2020 Complete Count Commission, we are recruiting 1,000 individuals all across the state, so they can deliver the trusted message. And you can be the trusted messenger and ambassador to the census and the census work. And then, just like you do on election day, get out the vote. Please help us in getting out the count. Very similar, canvassing and knocking on doors and talking to your neighbors and talking to community organizations about Census 2020 and why this is possibly the most important census in our history. In conclusion, as I mentioned before, the census is an essential policy tool for state government, county government, and local municipalities. The federal government depends on census data to allocate resources. State government use census data to draw legislative district and to direct spending. And academic, nonprofit, and business rely on census data to inform and direct their work. And finally, almost everything we know about our population and our communities come from information collected during the decennial census and its related surveys. So let's make sure that we have, with your help, the most complete and accurate count on Census Day for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Any questions?
Norman, does your department have a response for those residents of Pennsylvania who are either angry or reluctant to fill out a census form?
We have, through Keystone Count, they have been interviewing individuals from all across the Commonwealth on how, if an individual is mad and they have been interviewing them, how can we direct the message differently to those communities? And they have been doing the same research and the same work group with ethnic minorities. How a message, because a message to African American is completely different to the Latino community. And a message to the Latino community is completely different to the Asian and Pacific Islander community. So they have been doing also the same with those that are mad at government. And we can provide those messages to you as well.
If we have a group of local individuals who want to help with making sure that everyone is counted in our community. Sorry. I thought I was talking. I guess not.
Some people in the back.
Okay, sorry. If we have a group of individuals in our community that want to be sure that everyone in our community is counted, and we would like to be part of what you were calling the reminder phase from May to July, would we, and become a 2020 champion, census champion, would we contact your office to kind of, so that we can organize collectively and you will know about us?
Absolutely. And I have
We
some.
have handouts?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant.
So this is for the Become a Census Champion. And then we have the next meeting for the Governor Census 2020 Complete Count Commission. Everybody's welcome. Is on December 13th, right here in Harrison. And we can provide you with all the information that you need.
Next.
I understand there's just 10 questions. Can you give us an overview of what those 10 questions are going to be? Hopefully, it would make it easier for those who are not wanting to do this count.
It's going to be, the questions are very simple, and they are going to be, name, and that is a very important question that we are going to go before the media to make sure that people know that if anyone is asking for your Social Security, that is a scam. But the census will never ask you for a Social Security. So it's about name, how many people are living in your household, the address to make sure that we have the correct addresses of homes in Pennsylvania. And that is connected also because we have been building so many homes, and I know in my home county of Lancaster, we have been building thousands and thousands of homes. So they are asking for the address to make sure that it is exactly the same address that we have in the data in the Census Bureau. And then gender, is gender. It's a very simple, not too intrusive into your lifestyle. It's more about, once again, name, individuals that live in your household, address, gender, and I believe that would be almost it. But nothing about, the Social Security, nothing too personal, nothing that can be used against, against you. So, and that's why in the Census Bureau, when they were trying to go with about 25 questions, a lot of people were against it. And they said, simplify it the best possible way. So people in Pennsylvania and all across the nation, they can answer it freely and thinking that they will never, be targeted for anything else.
Other questions? Yeah.
Are you perhaps looking for volunteers to help accomplish all this?
Yes, please.
That is another great question. The Census Bureau must hire 500,000 people between now and January, and because the unemployment rate in our nation is so low, they are having a very difficult time in recruiting individuals. So you can work for the census is one option, and the second option is you can be a volunteer. And we have the partnership coordinators in almost every single community in Pennsylvania that you can join a complete count committee, in your county, in your city. Those are some of the options that we have available.
Other questions?
Is there going to be any effort to utilize the existing data that we already have? For example, everybody who files a tax return, everybody who has a driver's license, the rest of the stuff we have.
Well, if you have been following the media, recently you heard that the White House was asking governors to provide the driver's license files that we have. And the governor stood up and he said, we are not going to provide you with any data. We are not going to provide you with the data from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. The 10 questions of the census that we are going to be, partnering with you, they are enough to provide the information that you need. And then the information, the census is all about knowing how many people are in our nation. not about how many of them are undocumented immigrants, how many of them are U.S. citizens, how many of them have been in prison. That should not have been the questioning. So, the only answer that I can give you is, in Pennsylvania, the governor has been very strong in making sure that we are safeguarding whatever information we collect as a state government, that we don't have to share that information with the feds.
The local partnership groups that you mentioned, will they be listed on the state website? How do we find those in our community, if there might be one?
We have a website through the Penn State Data Center, and they will have a map. And if you are from Monroe County, you can go to the map, and in that map you can click your county, and it will tell you where the complete count committees are, who are the individuals, when the next event is going to take place. But in addition to that, the map is going to tell you this is a location where you can go and use a computer for Census Day. So through the Penn State Data Center, we will have that information available.
We have time for one more question, if there are any more questions.
Norman, I heard you said that residents will be able to complete via the internet their census poll. Again, it comes back to how do you address questions or suspicions of hacking or all the other nefarious conspiracies that come up when anything is done over the internet? Is there a completed response to that from your department yet?
This is a very intelligent group, because those are all the questions that we are getting all across, and especially after the Russian hacking our elections. And we have the toolkit providing you exactly the answers that we are going to be using statewide of why this is so important, and this is so different from the hacking of 2016. And I'll be more than glad to provide all those talking points and information to you, and you can share with the group.
We'll make sure they're available through Slack and through Dropbox, so you'll find us. Yep.
And on December 13th, when we have, if you are in Harrisburg, you are more than welcome to join us at the meeting, because that's where we are going to have the Census Bureau individuals, but also our team from DCED providing you with all the information that you need before the January 1st, so you all can go to the field and provide information the same way as the governor is and any of us in the administration.
Two websites that you probably want to keep track of regarding the census. Pennsylvania Counts 2020.info. So Pennsylvania Counts, all one word, with the year 2020 on the back end, .info, that's the website for the census. And then the Pennsylvania State Data Center, run out of the Penn State out of Harrisburg, which is pasdc.hbg.psu, one more .edu. All right? So I'll read that back again, pasdc.hbg.psu.edu. Good? All right. No? Do it again. pasdc.hbg.psu.edu. I can read the first one again. It's Pennsylvania Counts. So Pennsylvania, all one word, counts, like the count from Sesame Street, and 2020.info.
And then there is going to be another one that we are launching on December 13, and it's going to be pa.gov/census.
Which is so much easier. Because we'll do all of the hard, heavy lifting up front. All right. Thank you so much, Norman, for coming out and talking with us today. Thank you very much, everybody, for your great questions. Once again, we'll make sure that the PowerPoint decks are made available through our usual Fair District's internal channels. But I'm really grateful that we've added your voice to our conversation today about what we can do in terms of considering the implications of the census and redistricting. So, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.